Story 3. The Abduction at Falcon Lake. May 20th, 1967. Falcon Lake, Manitoba, Canada. Stefan Michalak was an amateur geologist with a passion for prospecting. He'd taken a weekend trip to the wilderness near Falcon Lake to search for silver ore in the rocky outcroppings of the Canadian Shield. It was a beautiful spring day, warm and clear, the kind of day that made Stefan grateful to be alive and free and alone in nature. He'd been working since early morning, hammering at rocks, examining samples, making notes in his field journal. Around noon, he sat on a flat rock to eat his lunch and rest. He was completely alone. The nearest other human being was probably miles away, back at the small resort town. The only sounds were birds calling, the whisper of wind through pine trees, and the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the distant lake. That's when he heard something different, a sound like geese in flight, but strange, mechanical almost. Stefan looked up and saw what he first took to be two glowing red objects descending from the sky. They were oval-shaped, brilliant red like heated metal, and they moved with purpose, with control. Stefan watched, transfixed, as one of the objects suddenly veered off and disappeared behind clouds. The other continued to descend, slowing as it approached, and finally came to rest on a flat section of rock about 160 feet from where Stefan sat. He couldn't move. His lunch sat forgotten in his lap as he stared at the craft, because that's what it was, unmistakably a craft of some kind. As it settled onto the rock, its color changed from red to gray-red, then to gray, and finally to what looked like stainless steel reflecting the afternoon sun. It was roughly oval, perhaps 35 feet in diameter, with a dome on top. Stefan's mind raced. Was this some kind of experimental aircraft? Had he stumbled onto a test site? But there were no markings, no visible engines or control surfaces, and it had descended without any sound of jets or propellers, just that strange goose-like honking that had now fallen silent. For a long time, Stefan would later estimate about half an hour, he simply watched the craft. It sat there, apparently inert, radiating waves of heat that he could feel even at that distance. The pine needles nearby began to smoke slightly from the heat. Stefan found himself moving closer, drawn by overwhelming curiosity mixed with caution. As he approached, he noticed an opening in the craft, a door of some kind that stood open, revealing a brilliant purple light emanating from within. Stefan called out in English, then in German, his native language. "Hello? Do you need help?" No response. He tried Russian, which he spoke haltingly. Still nothing. He came within a few dozen feet of the craft and peered carefully at the opening. Inside, he could see what appeared to be a maze of lights, beams of light crisscrossing in a pattern he couldn't comprehend. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like looking into the heart of some impossibly advanced machine. Stefan noticed something else, patterns on the exterior of the craft near the opening. They looked like symbols or writing, but in no alphabet he recognized. Geometric shapes interlocked with flowing curves, arranged in horizontal bands. He pulled out his field notebook and began sketching them, his hand trembling slightly as he worked. That's when he heard sounds from inside the craft. Voices, maybe, or something like voices, high-pitched, modulated in ways that didn't sound quite human. The hair on the back of Stefan's neck stood up. Whatever was in there, it wasn't human. He was suddenly, viscerally certain of that. He stepped back, thinking he should retreat to a safer distance, but before he could move more than a few steps, the door suddenly began to close. It sealed shut with no visible seam, the surface becoming smooth and continuous. The craft began to change color again, darkening to gray-red, then to the brilliant red of its arrival. Stefan stumbled backward, raising his arm to shield his eyes from the sudden glare. That's when it happened. A panel opened on the underside of the craft, near where Stefan stood, and a grid-like pattern became visible. Before he could react, a burst of hot gas, or exhaust, vented directly at him, hitting him in the chest with tremendous force and heat. The pain was instantaneous and overwhelming. Stefan's shirt and undershirt ignited. He tore at his clothing, trying to put out the flames, his skin already beginning to blister from the intense heat. The craft rose slowly, rotating as it ascended, and then shot upward with incredible speed, disappearing into the sky in seconds. Stefan collapsed to his knees, his chest burning with agony. He managed to remove his smoldering clothing and used dirt to cool the burns. Then, in shock and pain, he began the long journey back to his car. He got lost several times, his vision swimming, his sense of direction compromised by pain and trauma. It took him hours to cover ground that should have taken minutes. When he finally reached his car, he drove himself to the hospital, navigating the winding forest roads with difficulty. At the hospital in Winnipeg, doctors were baffled by his condition. He had first- and second-degree burns in a distinctive pattern across his chest and abdomen, a grid pattern, like the one he'd seen on the craft. The burns were consistent with severe heat exposure, but there was something else. He was suffering from severe radiation sickness. The doctors ran tests. Stefan's white blood cell count had plummeted. He was nauseous, dizzy, losing weight rapidly. Over the following weeks, he would lose over 20 pounds. The pattern of his burns remained visible, a geometric grid burned into his flesh that would scar him for life. Investigators came. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Royal Canadian Air Force, even American officials crossed the border to interview him. Stefan showed them his notebook with the symbols he'd sketched, led them to the site where the craft had landed. They found physical evidence, a circular area where the rock had been subjected to intense heat, where radiation levels were elevated, where the pattern of the craft's landing was clearly visible in scorched earth and melted stone. But Stefan's life had been shattered. He was plagued by nightmares, by recurring health problems related to his radiation exposure. The story made international news, and he was subject to ridicule and skepticism despite the physical evidence, despite his burns, despite the radiation readings at the landing site. In the years that followed, Stefan became increasingly reclusive. The encounter had marked him, literally in the scars on his chest, and figuratively in the way it had separated him from normal life. He'd been chosen, randomly and terrifyingly, to witness something that humanity wasn't supposed to see. He'd been burned by it, damaged by it, and left to live with the consequences. He thought often about those moments when he'd stood near the craft, hearing those strange voices, seeing those impossible lights. What had they been doing? Why had they come to this remote spot in the Canadian wilderness? Had they even known he was there? Or had he simply been an unfortunate bystander caught in their departure? The questions haunted him more than the burns did. He'd been given no answers, no explanation, no contact after that one terrible moment. Just pain and scars and the memory of something beautiful and terrible descending from the sky on a spring afternoon. Stefan lived with his secret, though it was a public secret known to anyone who'd followed the case, for the rest of his life. He died in 1999, his body weakened by the effects of that long-ago exposure. But before he died, he spoke to researchers, shared his story, insisted on its truth despite decades of skepticism. "I know what I saw," he would say. "I have the scars to prove it. I was there. It happened." And at the site near Falcon Lake, where the craft had landed, the rock still bears marks. Scorched stone, elevated radiation readings that persist decades later, a circular pattern where something impossibly hot once rested. The evidence remains, silent and irrefutable, a testament to an afternoon when one man encountered something that changed his life forever. The wilderness is quiet now, the same as it was before that day in 1967. Birds still call, fish still jump in the lake, pine trees still whisper in the wind. But the ground remembers. And anyone who knows the story, anyone who visits that remote spot and sees the scorched rock, can't help but look up at the sky and wonder what else might be out there, watching, waiting, occasionally descending to this small blue world for purposes we can never quite understand.